I think that occurred in the context, the best I can recall, of when when my parents announced to me that they expected me to go to a series of teachings that our preacher was going to have regarding joining the church. They were on Saturday mornings. Well, that didn't make me real happy because I looked at that as a Saturday morning loss. But anyway, but I went. And during that time, I knew that some of the things that I was doing, I knew that I had told lies. I knew that I had disobeyed my parents or dishonored my parents. I knew I'd had impure thoughts of various types. And so during those lessons, it became clear to me that a higher standard was expected of me if I were going to be a Christian. And I did not know that if I could live up to that standard or not.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Third Chair. We are so glad that you're joining us. My name is Brennan Lovelace, and with me is my friend Tom Pounder. Tom, what's up, man? How you doing?
Good, man. I'm doing very excited. Well, I'm very excited. I am excited.
It sounds like you're excited because you're not talking straight.
Exactly. Well, I'm really excited for our guest today because he's a guy that was really a good mentor to me when I first got to New Life and started doing some online ministry stuff. So I'm really excited about that. So, but before we begin, Brennan, I do have to ask you this question. It's one of the questions I always think about is, did Brennan ever get in trouble with the law before?
You always have thought about that?
Yeah, why not? I mean, have you ever, you're such a good guy. Have you ever done anything where you got the cops called on you before?
No. So I did have some moments when I was younger where the cops probably could have been called, but they weren't. But one time, my brothers and I and my best friend growing up, we went through this phase where we would TP people's houses in our neighborhood. And I look back on that and it was so horrible. We didn't even know these people. So we were just randomly doing it to be little delinquents. And one time we didn't drive. We went up to the grocery store. We would pull money together and buy the toilet paper and then hide it in our house. And one time we're walking back with all this toilet paper and this cop pulls up and he's like, "Hey, it might have actually been Halloween night. I'm not kidding. It might have been Halloween." He's like, what are you doing with all that toilet paper? And we're like, nothing. And and anyways, he ends up not buying it. He took the toilet paper from us. But it wasn't like we got thrown in the back of a cop car or anything. Well, what about you?
Well, let's think about this. It's Halloween night and a bunch of toilet paper and 3 boys. I mean, it doesn't get any more suspicious.
And we were like 12, 13, 14 years old. It absolutely looks like we're up to no good.
Yeah. Well, I did around my senior year in high school. I'll make this a really short story, but we staged a fake fight at a Wendy's in our neighborhood. Oh and gosh. We ended up, the guy hammed it up a whole bunch and people were really scared that we beat up this kid. And they called the cops on us. And as we were getting ready to do this at a local McDonald's, so we went to Wendy's, did it, and we're going to go, "Oh, that was so fun. Let's do it at McDonald's." We pull into the McDonald's parking lot and a police officer pulled us over and with the sirens and everything. And I get out saying, I'm the eldest spokesman at the time. I'm like, "Hey, we're okay. We were just joking." And he puts on the loudspeaker, "Show us the kidnapped victim." Because
my gosh.
The kid. Quote unquote, kidnapped the kid. And therefore, anyway, so we got out of it, no warning. My parents found out about it 15 years later, but that's it.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Okay, so let's tell people, why are we talking about you and I almost being arrested or our encounters with the police?
Yeah, because we have our favorite FBI agent on.
That's right.
None other than Ron Ferguson.
Ron,
how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
It's so you guys. Thanks, man. Thanks so much for being willing to tell us your story, and everybody who's listening. So excited to have you, Ron.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ron, you were at New Life when both Brennan and I started at New Life. You're no longer there. You're living somewhere else, and we'll kind of get into that. But just to get some people to get to know you a little bit more, we just want to go through some rapid fire questions for you. You don't have to spend long talking about it, but we'll just kind of go through some and let people get to know you if they don't know you already. So let's just start off with an easy one. What's your favorite holiday, Ron?
Actually, it is Resurrection Sunday.
Why is that?
A lot of reasons. Back in the day, when I was more interested in gifts and everything, Christmas would have been it. But Resurrection Sunday was special to me because that is a day just before my wife, Marge, died. And her favorite holiday had always been Resurrection Sunday. And we knew that she didn't have long to last. She had been ill with cancer for a day short of 2 years. And so I thought, oh my goodness, the Lord's going to call her home on Resurrection Sunday. I said, how special would that be?
Wow.
But he didn't. He tarried. And the day after, and it was Easter Sunday was on April the 12th that year, and in 1998, and then she died the next day on April the 13th.
Wow.
And so, but now it's not actually a holiday, but St. Patrick's Day. I was born on St. Patrick's Day.
Wow.
My folks, for some reason, didn't name me Patrick. I wish they had have, because I always liked that name. But then I had the chance to have our son Patrick be a Patrick. So he started where I left off, sort of, I guess. But anyway, I like St. Patrick's Day. People enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's a fun day.
It is definitely a very fun day. Well, thanks for sharing that, Ron. That's really special about Resurrection Sunday. Where would you rather live, beach or the mountains?
Okay. I think that question is too limited.
Well, please, Ron, give us a better question. We'll use it in the future.
Okay, I would have added lake to that. Because I really enjoy bass fishing and kayaking, and both of those are done best on a lake. We used to have a house, a little cottage on Lake Gaston in North Carolina, and I loved being there. Eventually, it got to be a little bit too much to care for, and our sons weren't able to be there and use it as much as they used to because they were busy with church stuff and all. So we sold that. But anyway, I really enjoyed that the most. The beach, though, is a close second primarily because my wife, my new wife, Shirley, likes the beach. And we're here at Virginia Beach, of course, and I can ride my bicycle to the beach and love it. So
that's awesome.
Beach number 2, yeah.
But okay, Brennan, let's mental note for future questionnaires. Let's include lake in there. That. So
we'll marry the questions. It'll be mountain lake, beach or mountain lake.
Oh
yeah, there you go. That's a good one. Okay, Ron.
Mountain lake. Yes.
All right, Ron. Last question. Favorite sports team?
Oh my goodness. Okay, you need to know a little of my background. I'm from Kentucky. And if you're from Kentucky, you've got DNA basketball built into your very genes.
Yeah.
And I remember as just a young boy, back when the big thing, if your family had a nice radio, that was really cool back then. And so I remember listening to the University of Kentucky basketball games, sitting on the couch in our living room and eating potato chips. And of course, since then, I've really, I continue to follow the University of Kentucky basketball, even though they haven't won a national championship since 2014.
Wow.
But
it's impressive you know that.
Yeah.
But in Kentucky, if you don't win the national championship, I mean, it's a failure. You've had a bad season.
Yeah. They have had less than stellar tournament runs recently.
Right. They've been booted out the first round the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's embarrassing. If you're from Kentucky, it's actually embarrassing. you hate to think about it. Yeah. But I also really, during the Nats run up to winning the World Series, I really got to be a Nats fan. And to really, my wife and I both watched as many games as we could and just loved that season. But of course, since then, things haven't been all that great with the Nats. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah. We were hoping that Brennan, with all his time spent in D.C., that he would switch from being a Cardinals fan to a Nats fan, but that just didn't happen.
No way.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. All right, well, Ron, thank you again so much for being here. As you know, we are so interested in hearing about people's stories and what their life was like before Christ and what their life has been like since they met Jesus. So as we kind of get in here into your story, Ron, would you give us a little bit of a backstory and kind of lead us into that first share of what was your life like before Christ?
Honestly, I can't recall a time when Jesus wasn't a part of my life. My earliest memories, seriously, were of my folks, and they were very devoted Christians, and we would go to church, 9th Street Christian Church in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, every Sunday. We would be there, and I can remember sitting in the little teeny chairs that they had, and singing, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. I can remember that. And so I never had anything but a very favorable impression about Christianity. Mm-hmm. The lady who was our Sunday school teacher just lived across the street from us, Mrs. Chappell. She was the wife of the president of the bank and was just a wonderful, wonderful person. And so I can't really remember, but I do know this. I do know that over time, of course, I started recognizing that there had to be something more than singing, Jesus loves the little children of the world. So I guess in that time, before I had really made a commitment to Christ, it was just I guess I hadn't really started thinking serious about it until later on through sermons that I heard at church. And back in those days, Billy Graham was great. He was on television all the time or on the radio. I can remember shooting basketball goals out in my backyard, listening to Billy Graham on the radio.
Wow.
And at that time, it was very clear to me that there was a path towards salvation, and I wasn't on it.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, about your upbringing. Again, there's not a time that you don't remember where God wasn't a part of your life in some way. Is that in large part because of your parents? Were they strong believers and they took you to church and that was part of your lifestyle, or was it because of the neighborhood kids? Talk to us a little bit about that community.
It was the community. It was just the culture of where I grew up. I don't know that it was this way all across the country, but I was kind of a beaver cleaver, type of kid. Everything was nice. It was a safe community. Everybody knew everybody. If I did something wrong, the neighbors would correct me. The school teachers would correct me and call my folks and say, Ron's having a little trouble these days, but could you make him be quiet in class? and if a police officer had have stopped me, which that happened on one occasion, he would have called my father and said, Ron was going a little bit over the speed limit. So it was that kind of a community. So, and there were, I don't really recall ever anything negative regarding Christianity or the church. Not at all. There were different churches, and but there was no big argument over, well, he's a Methodist, he's a Baptist. We just all went to church. There was a Catholic church there, and of course we played our regular grade school and all would play their teams in sports. So that was a little bit different, but it just the whole experience of growing up was very Christian, and no big problems.
So yeah, Ron, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of just that culture that you grew up in, where people went to church? There might have been different denominations or churches, but can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, how did you start to realize that not everybody was a Christian or grew up going to church?
Right. I guess it was probably about the time that I went to college, that I found out that there was a lot, that there were people who thought differently about church and who weren't all that excited about it. When I was in school, I can remember having disagreements, but they were nice, but they were just, for example, at that time, one of the big questions for kids, and I can remember discussing this with my friends, saying whether or not it was okay to go to the movie on a Sunday. Was that a sinful thing to do?
Wow.
And even then we were talking about abortion, but it wasn't in terms of like abortion today, when it can be done just for about any reason whatsoever. And the time our discussion was, well, if it was going to kill the mother, if it was really and truly going to hazard the life of the mother, was it at that time okay to have an abortion? It was not just for for some, I hate to use the word, not some frivolous cause. It was a serious life-threatening event if you were going to have an abortion. But those were discussion topics, when I was, probably in 6th and 7th grade, talking about those.
Okay, so Ron, you're talking about how you're shooting basketballs and you're listening to Billy Graham, and you're like, you're not going down the right path. So what causes you to keep on asking questions there? What was it, something that Billy said that you heard, or what was that like? Some way,
I don't know if it started out because of Billy Graham's messages or the ones that I heard at our own church. But, I just, the whole concept of sin started slipping into my thinking. And this may sound a little strange, but at that time, girls were creeping into my thinking. And I had not done anything wrong, but I know that some of my thoughts were less than pure.
Gotcha.
And so I was concerned about that. I just, it really bothered me. Okay, well, what happens to me? Is God pleased with me or not at that time? And I was thinking, there's no way, that he could be well pleased with me.
So is that kind of when you started to have more of an understanding of what sin was because of the way you grew up in this Christian culture? I know you had to hear about that all the time, but it also sounds like it was such a positive experience for you that it was kind of like, well, this is just who I am. I am Christian, right? And so what was this? Can you take us into that story of like what was leading up to, and the moment when you're like, I need to give my life to Christ, and as we would say in the second share, where you met Jesus?
Okay. I think that occurred in the context, the best I can recall, of when my parents announced to me that they expected me to go to a series of teachings that our preacher was going to have regarding joining the church. And they were on Saturday mornings. Well, that didn't make me real happy, because I looked at that as a Saturday morning loss. But anyways, but I went, and during that time, I knew that some of the things that I was doing, I knew that I had told lies. I knew that I had disobeyed my parents or dishonored my parents. I knew I'd had impure thoughts of various types. And so during those lessons, it became clear to me that a higher standard was expected of me if I were going to be a Christian. And I did not know that if I could live up to that standard or not. And there were other factors involved there too. By that time, I'd started to have some questions about, okay, is this the truthfulness of the gospel message, and about Jesus? Was he a real person? Was he not a real? All those things, and so most of those questions got answered during that training. But I remember evidence started to make a difference in my life at that time. And at that time, I had a question about this. I think it, was related to my interest in girls at that time. But anyway, I knew that there was no such thing as a virgin birth, at least through my experience and everything else. I knew enough about biology by then.
Right.
This doesn't seem very likely. But there didn't seem to be any way to prove it or to disprove it. So,
right.
Well, maybe this is all a lie. Maybe there's not, maybe the Bible is not right in this regard. So, but then it occurred to me that the resurrection of Jesus was just as much a miracle or more than, because I knew, well, people just don't rise from the dead. They just don't.
Right.
You of one doing that. But anyway, when I looked at the biblical evidence of it, that was convincing to me. And so I reached the conclusion, well, if God can raise someone from the dead, and there seems to be a lot of evidence to that in the Bible, and, including the changed lives of the disciples and everything else, then, virgin birth's not all that difficult for God, the creator of the universe.
Right.
So,
That's so true. And I think that's what I love what you just said there is that you had questions, you had doubts, you had uncertainty about this. And I think some of the reaction that a lot of us can take is saying, well, I doubt this ever happened, so I'm just not going to believe it together. But rather than just discounting it, you said, let's look at the evidence. And that's why I like the Lee Strobel book, that he did, A Case for Christ. I think that's the right one. He did a few different books, but how, you look at the evidence, and when you see and really examine it with an open mind, the evidence is overwhelming that, hey, this is very possible.
Right. And for me today, because of my interest in science and having studied apologetics to some extent, just the whole nature of creation, the language of DNA, all of these things just point to an intelligent creator who designed and implemented the known universe, and everything now just makes so much sense that that I'm puzzled to think, how can anybody discount, and part of it, I all I can think of is they just may not be thinking about it. It's, people are just, I know guys are good at this, just being oblivious. Shirley has told me on occasion that I'm oblivious. And I know it's true. But I think people can be like that regarding the important questions in life.
Yeah.
And not ever get to the point where they're willing to deal with them. They just put it off. Maybe I'll think about that later, whatever.
Yeah. Tom, I think this is the title of this episode is Guys Are Oblivious.
Yes.
Johnny, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so Ron, going back a little bit, you see you were in these classes with your pastor and you realize, oh, I am not perfect. I have done these things that are wrong. And I'm sorry if you already said this. Was that the moment when you were like, I need to give my life to following Jesus for all my days?
Yes, that was the time. And that class was being held leading up to Resurrection Sunday, Easter Sunday. And so I was baptized on Easter Sunday when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
And so that's that's when I officially said, okay, well, I am really a Christian now. But even at that time, I don't think I knew the full implications of everything.
Right.
With faith, and there was so much I did not understand. I did not understand being able to really apprehend God's righteousness through what Christ had done. And so there were a lot of questions that I had still. And at that time, I wasn't worried about the fuller understanding of the extent of the gospel message. I may not still have it all.
Right. Yeah.
It became a lot clearer later on when I really said, oh my goodness, I have really got to, this is really important to try to live a life that's well-pleasing to my Savior, because He's done for me. And it's such a joy that He allows me to do that.
That's amazing, Ron. And I, like other people we've had on the podcast, I can resonate with some of what you're saying too, because I was very similar, like never knew a time that I didn't consider myself Christian. And yet then there became that point when I was about 13 that I was like, oh, wow. Now there was some light bulb that went off of, this is what Jesus did for me. I know these things that I've done wrong, even in my young 13 years of life. And I've done many, many more, awful things that are sinful since then. But at the same time, it was, you're stepping out in faith and realizing this is a free gift that God gave me. I believe Jesus died for me. I believe He rose again. And so I'm going to follow Him no matter what. And so kind of on that note, as we move into the third chair, what has your life been like since, and how has Jesus impacted your life? Because I don't want to assume, but I'm going to anyway. I guess there's got to be times in your life since you made that decision that you had questions and you might have had doubts. Can you speak to that? But more importantly, just lead us into the third chair, and what has your life been like since then? Right.
Okay. It's interesting. I really have not ever had any serious doubts. I've had kind of times when I was saying, okay, well, how would I answer this question that some atheist would ask or something like that? How would I answer that? And maybe I do, or maybe I don't have a good answer for it. But I never had any real doubts about the truthfulness, the validity of the gospel message. That has been solid, and I have since growing up, starting early in my teen years. Let me back up a second. You know how a few years ago at New Life we had a series where we were talking about the story, and
right.
The whole concept of God's story playing out for all of creation, but all of society, but also in individual lives, how His story is there, that He's writing His story or part of His story through your life. And so that, early on, I started seeing that happening in my life where, I did this and this happened and this was a consequence of, and they were all very positive things that led, if I can give you an example.
Of course.
That led right through all the way up to today. When I was in high school, there was a young man named Warren Dawson who had polio, and he was a couple of years ahead of me. But something told me, you ought to help him with his wheelchair. And so I would, after I could drive and everything, I would pick him up at his house and take him to the football games and help him wheel him around, and help as much as I could with him. And because he was, pretty much immobile. But anyway, we developed a friendship, and during the friendship, he was interested in amateur radio as a hobby because that's something he could do just sitting behind his desk at home. And so I said, well, if I'm going to be a friend of his, maybe I ought to learn a little bit about this. So I learned the Morse code and got my amateur radio license. And
wow,
that was really cool doing that. I enjoyed that. But anyway, then when I got it, when I went to college and I was commissioned in the Navy, and they saw that I had a background of dealing with radio, and so off I went to communications officer school in Newport, Rhode Island, and finished that. Meanwhile, I got a private pilot's license. Part of private pilot's license back then was navigation, and navigation, the radio signals for navigating came across in code, in Morse code, which I knew, well, that's really neat. I knew that. I didn't have to relearn that.
Wow.
Anyway, so after the Navy, went into the FBI, and I was assigned to the Gary, Indiana resident agency was my second off of assignment, and I got a call, and they said, "Hey, we see you've got a background in communications and you've studied cryptography." And I said, "Yeah, I have." And so anyway, discussed that with the guy who was recruiting me. It turns out that the choice of who was going to get this promotion, it was a promotion, was between me and another guy. And part of what he said to me during the interview process was, "Well, what do you think about, do you think you'd be interested in cryptography or learning how to be a cryptanalyst?" I said, "Well, sure. Well, I've just read the book Code Breakers, which my parents had given me for my birthday." And he said, "You read that? You read that book?" I said, "Well, yeah." And so they said, "Okay, I think you're on your way to Washington."
Wow.
And so, and then my first assignments at FBI headquarters were all dealing with communications and security and cryptography, cryptanalysis, that sort of thing. So anyway, I followed that train, from sort of being nice to a guy with a wheelchair, right to my career in the FBI. So
wow,
to me, it was remarkable how that all happened and played out.
Yeah, and how God blessed you along the way, in that story. I mean, just being faithful and trying to love like Christ. I don't want to minimize that. Like, we have the opportunity to do that every day to people, and we may never know them, but developing those friendships because you feel like, oh, you know what? Like, this would be great. And this is a way that I show God's love, and make a new friend in the process. And then, yeah, I mean, that is a great way to kind of pinpoint these different moments, right? That you can point back to and say, this is how God kind of showed up in this way. And we know that hindsight can be 20/20 there, but sometimes we don't take the time to actually look at how God is moving and working in our lives along the way.
And what I said was just the key things. There were a lot of intermediate steps,
right?
In that, but that was sort of the sort of bare outline of the trajectory of a career. How it started, the interest and all that. Now, since then, you're asking about, God's impact on my life now.
Right.
Is just continuing. It's the most important part of my life right now. It's just trying to be a good disciple. And I love New Life, the emphasis that Brett and the staff put on the need, the urgency of discipleship. And so that's a major part of my life. I just attended a conference, incidentally, out at Grace College and Seminary in Indiana called the Followership Conference. Now, in the FBI and and my work at New Life and everything, I've been to a zillion leadership conferences.
Right.
And so this guy, Brant Hansen, who has a podcast, he calls it the Oddcast. You could call it that too, the Oddcast. But anyway, the thing is about, okay, well, how do you be a follower? Now, of course, part of being a follower is being a disciple maker. You got to do that. And so I really enjoy doing those sorts of things. Also, during another part of what I feel like God has led me to through part of the story business is being a caregiver. I sort of believe that everybody ought to be a caregiver in some regard. Okay, that brings me to, the most painful part of my life. After my wife died, a couple of years, and a couple of years later, I dated a woman, and that ended. We got married, and that ended in a divorce, which is the most horrible, shameful thing that happened to me in my life. But during that terrible time, when I had been a faithful member of the church and then went through that experience, Brett and the other people at New Life did not abandon me. They, were very supportive and loved on me. And at that time, a really neat thing happened to me is that up until that time, I would have looked down my theological nose at anyone who had had a divorce. I would have said, how could you possibly not be able to get along with someone that you married? Couldn't you work things out?
Right.
And I learned during that experience that I was absolutely, it didn't matter how much I wanted the marriage to succeed, how much I tried, how much effort I put in it, how much I prayed, even, it did not work.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ron.
No, you go ahead.
No, I'm just going to reiterate kind of what you said there, because I think that's so important, is that people who are going through divorce, like you went through a divorce, I went through a divorce, it is a shameful experience. And I've shared this before, is even as a minister, especially as a minister, I'm supposed to have my act together. I'm supposed to be, have it all together. And to have the people support you in that way, especially people you look up to and people that are kind of in authority. Again, when Brett and the leadership team came to me and said, Tom, we know the situation, we support you. We want to, you don't know what that did for me and the encouragement it had for me as it did for you, Ron.
Right. Unless you've gone through something like that, it's hard to understand. And like you mentioned, especially the shameful part of it, here you are, a leader in the church or a minister or whatever, and you couldn't even salvage your own marriage. It was just a terrible thing. But what that led to, now this is another part of the story type of aspect of my walk with Jesus, is that instead of having this, disdain for someone who had been through a divorce, I became, very concerned about people like that and wanting to help them. Like it talks about in 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4, about, how, if you've gone through some trouble and God has helped you through it, then you need to be busy helping other people with the same comfort that you received from Christ. And as a result of that, we started our first, I would call them first caregiving type ministries at New Life, which was a divorce care. There was a older singles group that met. It was sort of part of that because they were older Christians who had gone through difficult times. The Celebrate Recovery, Grief Share, all of those things. And various other groups within the church, Stephen's ministry, things like that, where I think where God asked me to play a role.
Yeah, and Ron, I think I love this because we say this all the time. There's a lot of different chapters and parts of our story that we can share with people. So if you're listening to this right now, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is, yes, there is the 3-cheer story that deals with salvation, right? But then there's also, in my opinion, the working out of our faith and the different trials and tribulations that we might go through, as the Bible tells us that we are going to experience, and how God shows up and works through those things. So in my mind, I think of these different moments in my life where I am a believer and I'm following Jesus. I'm trying to help other people do the same thing. And then there's these other moments where I'm then meeting Jesus again. There's this new understanding of how much God loves me and his grace for me. And then my life changes again. And then there's like this other third chair moment of, oh, this is a new part of my story that I can share with somebody, depending on the type of conversations that I might find myself in one day. And so, Ron, you're sitting here telling us about that. Ron, I'm guessing, well, I'll just say it this way. By the time you went through all these painful things and you lost your first wife, Marge, to cancer, the mother of your two children, and you go through this divorce, you'd been following Christ for decades. Right. But there's still a part of your story where you met Jesus through other people showing God's love to you and caring for you, helping you through that, right? That God is showing his love to you. And then you take that and go, you know what? Now I've developed this heart for care ministry. I want to help others who are in the same place. And that's really good on a moral level of just being a good person if we want to just end it there. There's lots of people that do that, right? But because of the hope that we have in Christ, there's a different motivation there.
Yes.
And I don't want to speak for you, but I think I can because I know a little bit of your heart. That my point with all of this is there's different chapters and there's different moments in your story, right? All of it for anybody listening as you're developing your story, and you might say, oh yeah, I've got another one of these chapters in my life. I would just encourage you, make sure that always is pointing back to Jesus when you're sharing that with somebody who may or may not be a believer. And that leads to a gospel conversation. So Ron, I really appreciate that. And if I can, just kind of as we move on a little bit, and we're beginning to wrap up, but we always like to ask a couple of these questions. And you've been through so much and you've got such an interesting story, I think, because I really enjoy this kind of stuff. You were part of, I know, a lot of things in the background that you would never brag about with the FBI, but all these different chapters to your life fascinate me. And guys like Tom and I look up to you. So if you could encourage believers, if you could encourage people, you don't know what they're walking through right now, they're listening to this episode, what comes to mind and how you would encourage them in their walk and their journey with Christ?
I would encourage them to just really consider the faithfulness of Jesus. How God is so dependable, so faithful, that whatever you're experiencing is part of the story. And the scripture talks about you do not realize right now what is happening, but later you will understand. That's in John 7:13 or something like that. But anyway, you may not get it right now. Troubles really happen to everybody. You can't escape them. But you can have confidence in the future. You can have a hope for the future that's not just some ephemeral something. It's a real solid hope that everything's going to work out. One time, years ago, Bob Skiffington gave me a book called Future Grace. And that has been kind of a touchstone for me since then. And the idea is that if you think about all that you've been through up until right now and all the difficulties and whatever, God has always gotten you through it. Yeah. Why would he stop now?
Right.
Why would he abandon you now? And you'll be, it may be tough and it probably will be.
Yeah.
Sometime. But he is there, he is faithful, and you can rely upon him. That's the way, if I were going to encourage somebody, that would be what I would share with them.
Yeah, I love that, man.
That's great. And actually, that's a great kind of a stopping point for us today. Ron, we're going to have you back on the podcast again.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, we just scratched the surface again. And if you've ever met Ron in person, you know how much of a caring and mentor type of person he is. And he touches the lives of everybody that he comes in contact with. And
that's right.
I always cherish every time that he comes up to visit up in Northern Virginia, and I get to see him and talk with him for a few minutes. So I really appreciate that. If you're listening to the podcast and you got questions, if you got thoughts, you're like, hey, I want to learn more about this, feel free to email us, thirdchair@newlife.church. We would love to talk to you a little bit more Brennan and I check that email all the time, so feel free to email us at any time. But again, Ron, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us, and we'll see everyone else at the next episode.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.